Welcome to the High Performance Hockey Podcast. Today we're joined by Brian Kozak. Brian, as well as his mentor, Jurg Feldman, has dedicated over decades experimenting with cutting-edge technology from HRT, HRV, lactate, bioharness, Spiro Tiger, FitMate, to advancing with NERS, Portman to Moxy, PhysioFlow, Omega Wave, INX, and diverse breathing technologies. His pursuit? Real-time insights into each system's limiters, compensators, and their implications for training, rehab, and recovery. Alongside, he's delved into Hatha Yoga in India, gaining firsthand insights into yoga sciences. 3 years were spent in collaborative exploration with willing coaches shaping inner performance and foundational guides. His journey culminated with collaboration from Aaron Davis and Patrick Estes at Evolve Health and Performance. Together, they've debated, evaluated, and created Performance Integration's owner manual, which now serves to coach athletes and mentors, fostering the integration of technology from well-being to peak performance. This was a really interesting conversation. I always learn something from everybody during our interviews, but we talk about what is Moxy, what is the technology, oxygen saturation, total hemoglobin, utilization versus development, and the deep physiology of ice hockey. Last but not least, we talk about utilization and delivery and the methods and quote unquote, how we train it. It's a fantastic podcast. Welcome in. Brian, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Anthony.
Well, you know, as I do typically with a lot of the guests that we have on our podcast, Brian, I always ask a question towards the end of our discussion. I say, who would be one or two individuals that you would strongly recommend that we as an audience could learn from? The goal with our podcast has always been to spread a good message, to educate the masses, and leave the game in a better place. And several of the colleagues that I've rubbed shoulders with mentioned your name. So I said, I've got to get you on the podcast. So first and foremost, thanks for joining us, and thank you for the time. We're going to go right into the guts of this. We're talking all things physiology today, Physiology 101 with you. And I also want to talk, obviously, about the Moxy. So let's start with, what is the Moxy monitor?
Okay. Should I read my notes about it, or should I just...
You can go wherever you'd like, Brian.
Tell you a story. You know, for me, when I was always seeking to learn, right? For whatever reason, I was a hockey player. I just wanted to win. Someone please teach me. I come from a small town, Kenora, Ontario. You know, we produce some really good hockey players, Mike Richards being one of them. You know, down an hour away is Chris Pronger, right? So Jonathan Taves lives here. We got some talent in this area. So for me, I wasn't as talented as those guys, but for me, once I went to junior, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a bunch of really good players, not just me, right? And it's a great eye opener. So I wanted to learn how to win, because when we would go and play these teams when we were younger, you're playing Toronto, you're getting spanked 9-2. So how do I win? So my last year junior, I found Orland Kurtenbach out in Richmond, BC. We were in the BCHL. That guy taught me how to win. You know, he treated me like a man, which was the first guy. But I'm 58 years old, so you know, it was the first man to talk to me like a man, right? And so I was like, I'll run through a wall for this guy. That quest of learning how to win, that's been in me. When I got into the physiology part, training athletes, Jurg Feldman was the guy for me that taught me that part of it, right? We did the blood lactate and the VO2. We had all these different technologies that we were playing with. He had a group of 14 like-minded guys that loved to argue.
Yes. What a great learning environment, by the way. That's awesome.
The best, right? Open-minded, but argue things and looking at research and ripping it apart. And what can we use out of this? What didn't they know because of the technology? You know, guys coming up with these amazing ideas with no technology, you know, or limited technology. It's incredible. That's not a skill I have. I'm the dog chewing the bone. Give me the technology and let me play, right? And then I'll bring it back to the real smart guys, and they can argue it out and write papers. So with the Moxy, when my mentor, it was his partner, gave me that device, it was actually a Portamon. So it was the NERS technology.
And Brian, to stop you really quick, could you educate the masses, and some may not know, the NIRS technology? What does it measure and what is it?
That's a great question. Let's get to that after. Let me
Okay,
tell you the
fair
story.
enough. Sure,
Okay.
sure.
So I'm building it up the Kenora way.
Okay.
It took a long time. So if we had a device, right, before we were pulling blood, and I was like, ugh, it's great. We see more stuff, but it's systemic. Where's it coming from? Right? There's just so many questions, and there's some holes in the game, but great stuff. It allowed us to do so much more. Like I was pulling blood in guys in the penalty box. Like,
jeez.
Because I want to see when they lost their mind, how's their lack. So with this device, if I could say this, if we had a device that we could put on an athlete, a hockey player, and have them, just a simple, so if it's a forward, they're going blue line, hardest thing, stops and starts, right? Pull out. As soon as that athlete started to fatigue, with any coach's eye, you'll know when they fatigue how.
Their technique breaks down, right?
There it is.
They're coming up. Yeah.
There it is. Short stride coming out of their hockey stance, right? That's it. We see it. Well, what if there was a technology that would show us that a few seconds before, right? And then that same technology would also show you when they're recovered, ready to go again.
Sure.
And then it would also show you how many sets they could do at quality before they fell apart. Now, your coach's eye is going to see that anyways. It's like I was talking with Andrew Hauser today.
Oh, great guy.
Presentation today. And we're going over this concept, and I said, when I've started lifting weights, it's do 4 sets of 12, for example. So I pick a weight, I could probably do 13 or 14, but I get 12 clean. The next set, maybe just 12 clean, maybe. The next set, maybe 10 or 11 reps clean, and the last one, maybe 8 or 9. Okay, I'm fatiguing, to make it simple. I'm losing my technique, my coordination. So the coaches, I can see that. The hockey player, like you said, starts losing their technique. But this technology would show us that, okay, at about 15 seconds, coach's eye saw it coming out of the skating technique, but the technology said he was in trouble 3 seconds before. But what if we stop him 3 seconds before? How many sets could he do? Say he does 20. We recover him for 48 hours, and we do the same thing, but we go by the coach's eye. And so instead of instead of stopping him at 12 seconds, we let him go that 15 seconds. But that 15 seconds becomes 14 seconds, 12 seconds. And instead of doing 20 quality reps, maybe we get only 10.
Sure.
That's what the Moxy does.
Wow.
That's what I saw when I first put it on. I had 2 skaters on the ice at first. And I had them just doing, one was a forward, one was a D, so that just their patterns, right? But stop and starts in it. So the D man was going forward, backwards, forward. And I could see them coming out of their stance. And what was happening on this Moxy was there's just this line going down. It's like energy depleting. As soon as the energy flatlined, went parallel, they were out of their hockey stance. I go, that can't be. Well, now I'm going to play.
Yeah.
So I stopped them right away. And with the one, I went back a couple seconds. So say it was 15 seconds, the line was going down and it started to flat. At about 12 seconds, I stopped them. And Shelby Ballendine, awesome skater. So she did about 20 sets of that before she fell apart. Now, the other guy, Tim Traber, who ended up playing over in Switzerland, just a workhorse. I went by the coach's eye time. So the line would go down as he's doing the stops and starts, blue line to blue line, and then it would flat line for about 3-4 seconds. But as the sets went, that flat line would get longer and longer, and you could see his stride shortening. He only did about 8-9 sets, and he was done. Okay. Now I'm making the story sound pretty good that I'm doing pretty good. It was about 30 seconds I was pushing this guy. So just imagine, like he puked on the bench. He recovered. He went in, had a shower, laid. He was done, right? And we've all seen players like that when they got caught in the ice too long, right? They're done for the rest of the game. So right then I knew no matter what that technology was telling, and that's what we'll get to, I knew it was showing me the energy. And then I had a question right away. That what I was taught was anaerobic. But what that Moxy is showing me is oxygen. So that doesn't make sense at all. What I was taught in school, that didn't make sense. So now my interest is piqued. Now we got something to play with that with Jurgen the 14, right? This technology is showing us the one line going down is the oxygen. So on hockey players, on over like a trend is an ideal tank would be 80%, and they can bring that oxygen down to 5%.
Wow.
Right? So this tank, as soon as that line was going down, he was quality skating. Perfect. Coordination. As soon as it flatlined, he was in trouble. I saw it live. And then the line would recover and he's ready to go. So I said, what's the brown line on there for? Right? So the brown line was the blood flow. So as he's skating, the brown line's also going down. But some players, the brown line went up. Well, now that's not going to fly with research, guys. What's going on? So then I put the Moxy on my arm and I squeezed, right? With a measures how much force you're squeezing, right?
Sure.
You could
Handheld
dumbbell.
dynamite. Yep.
Yes, that's
Yep.
So on the big words, you help me out because you're the PhD guy.
No way. You're gonna help me. You're gonna help me.
I'm the guy. I'm the dog with the bone. You're the smart guy. You're the big one. So when I was squeezing up to, it was like from 0, which doesn't make sense, but I'm not squeezing, to up to around 30%, the brown line went down. When I squeezed from about 30 to 50%, the brown line went up. And then when I squeezed harder than 50%, the brown line stayed flat. So I'm like, okay, compression, force, right? So that's a contraction force when the line's going down. And I'm looking in the books of research where it's saying, this is a contraction force. The line going up is a venous occlusion, 30 to 50%, and 50% above is an arterial occlusion. That brown line was showing us what contraction force the hockey player was using. So then I could zoom in and make it super sensitive, like an ECG. And when a hockey player is standing start, pull out, boom, 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 it was venous occlusion, then compression once the stride started going out. So we had it. So we were also working with the speed climber. He had the world record. They go like a spider up the wall in 6-point-something seconds. The world record was at that time. That guy. So just think of his weight pulling. He never created an arterial occlusion. It was venous occlusion. He'd let go before it went arterial, and he was moving so fast. And then we got to work with motorcycle guys. That's the pump in their arm. So we started looking at these different fields and different athletes, and we were saying that brown line not only shows us the blood flow, shows the contraction force.
Sure.
Well, then we got to go train it now, because what if a person is creating a venous occlusion at say 30 to 50% of their max strength, right? What if we could make that 40 to 60, 50 to 70? That's it, right?
Sure.
That is how we started looking at this. We said, okay, we're seeing oxygen as an energy source, and it matches with what the coach's eye shows us on the ice. That as soon as fatigue, as soon as the coordination, as soon as the technique breaks down, that green line, the oxygen, is flatlining. Still don't have 40% in the tank. You just can't use it efficiently. That's another deeper physiological thing. That didn't matter to me. I just had a device now I could see live. So now I could run, in those books, in some research we saw, if you push a person for 30 seconds, how long they can last, and then, down to 5 seconds, we mimicked it. We seen it live. And then we started to see it in different players, because this guy, for whatever reason, was creating a venous occlusion long, holding it on, and even an arterial. Well, limiting blood flow, limiting oxygen, they're going to shut down quicker. So then I'm thinking, okay, now if we can get them way stronger. So we were also working with Navy SEALs at this time. we can get them stronger. They can last longer because they're not going to create an arterial anymore.
Let me ask you this from a physiology standpoint. So educate me. So when we lift heavy weights, power lifters, we occlude blood in the capillary. It's not a systemic flow like we'd be getting on a bike, right? That circulation in terms of the oxygen getting, we pull it, we squeeze tight. Is that, I don't want to say that's not exactly the same, but the run to glide in hockey, that running action where we're hammering the ice quick. Are we doing that from a physiological standpoint in a similar fashion from that run as like not lifting heavy weights slow, but you know what I mean? Are we occluding like that in that run phase and the glide phase? It's more of that systemic circulatory effect. Does that sound right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's exactly where I went. I was like, okay, I need something so I can compare, reference it, right? Because what I'm seeing is as soon as they start striding that 1, 2, 3 to get up to speed, now McDavid will be a little quicker, maybe just 1, 2, or maybe 1. But normally, that 1, 2, 3, right? It would be venous occlusion, and both legs we're seeing. We have a device on either leg, venous occlusion, and then as they lengthen their stride, back to a compression force, blood flowing. So if we can increase their strength, and not only the strength, it's important. If we define coordination as the ability to contract and relax, Well, if you can contract super hard and relax, it's sometimes we get stuck on the first part because as a strength trainer, I want to get them strong, right?
Sure.
Right? And especially back in my day when the game was you could hold on, you could ride for a bit.
Yep.
We wanted to get them super strong, but we also lost the endurance part of it. They couldn't last long enough on the shift. They're tiring out, right? They're using a lot more energy with that extra muscle too. So where was that balance? Where's that range of the efficiency? So my mentor says, it's all about recovery and relaxation. We have to teach the mental game.
Sure.
We have to teach them how to relax, right? So, for example, we would have athletes stand up and put their hands on their belly, right? You stand up, put your hands on your belly, and then you sit down and then let the belly go. Not one hockey player of thousands of guys ever let it go. They were always bracing. They were always on the beach looking good.
Yeah.
And then I said, okay, well, what's the root of that? What are we missing? Well, breathing's the root. If you don't breathe, you're dead. So it's really important, right? And if we watch kids, we see kids how they belly breathe, right? Not belly breathing. There's no lungs down there. What they're doing is because they're small, the diaphragm pushes down and it pushes your stomach and your liver and all that. So it needs to create space, the diaphragm. So it pushes it out so it looks like they're belly breathing. But what's happening is their rib cage, the diaphragm goes down, the rib cage moves out.
Yep.
Every kid, unless there's a birth defect on their breathing, on that mechanism, that physiology, they breathe perfectly. Now, when you're watching the hockey game, did you see how Janmark?
Yeah.
They must have waited for him because he wasn't breathing heavy. But every time he went to speak, he did this. He inhaled and then he spoke. He's an upper frontal chest breather. No kid breathes that way. No child. At around 10 or 12 years old, females, it changes a little quicker. They switch to upper frontal breath. If you watch Bennett, when they interviewed Bennett in the second intermission, he wasn't recovered breathing. He was breathing like this with no smile on his face. He don't like to smile unless he wants to stand and smile.
I heard that. Paul Maurice said that. I heard that. Finally got a smile, he said.
Yeah. So we're looking at the root. They're already in a so-called sympathetic fight or flight state because they're breathing that way. So now they're creating their own tension. Now the diaphragm cannot work, doesn't have the space to work properly, and it goes on and on and on. That's how we started looking at that aspect of it.
Interesting. Very interesting. I want to hit on, because you had sent me some verbiage and a lot of great verbiage on the Moxy unit. Could you talk to the listeners? Again, some may not know local oxygen saturation, SmO2, and total hemoglobin. Talk to me. Maybe the best way to explain it, if you're comfortable, Brian, How does that work if I'm a hockey player on the ice? What do those readings read if I'm on a shift? How would that be normal? What would resting? I know everybody's different, N of one. Why are those important? Might be the best question to start with, and then go from there.
Okay, great question. Okay, so SmO2, again, fancy stuff. For me, I want to keep it simple. It's measuring your oxygen.
Okay.
So basically, the simplest way is when I'm training an athlete and I'll put them on a bike, like a hockey player, I'll put them on a bike and I'll have the screen so he can see it. And I'll crank up the tension. I'll say, okay, sprint. And as he sprints, that green line, the SmO2 line, the oxygen goes down. So I say, stop before it flatlines, stop. And then watch it come back up. Now, I'll even, with some guys, like, the hockey lawyers, I call them, they always want to argue, right? They always want nowadays, they got so many questions. It's awesome.
Yeah.
So I'll say, okay, you go, yeah, Cozy, when I had my foot this way, that line didn't rise up as quick. They already see it. It's simple. They know computers than I do. And when I put my foot this way, I said, yeah, it's like a hose, a garden hose. If you bend it, the water doesn't flow through that well, does it? So when you put the Moxy on your left foot, when the leg is straight, the hose is straight. When you stopped leather time, the left foot was bent, so the hose is bent. That's why the first one, you went down is like a V. You sprinted, you stopped, it went back up. The second one, you sprinted the same angle of the V on the start, but you had the leg bent. It took longer to get back up. He's like, oh, right on. Okay, so now you know. So between shifts, what should you be doing with your legs if you could?
Interesting. I want to make sure I answer the right question because you asked a great one. Between shifts, obviously for systemic flow, you wouldn't want to have a deep knee bend, correct? You'd almost want to straighten your legs. Am I accurate when I say that? I'm putting the pieces together. You're
100%.
okay. And that's the reason. Systemic circulation and oxygen, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Perfect.
Good.
So I won't name the team or the coach. He's still coaching, not the same team, but it was in the BCHL. I went and he was really open to the innovation because we were pulling blood back then. That's when the shift of the lactate to the NIRS technology. We were going through that shift, so we were doing both. Plus, we were doing the VO2 on ice and everything. But with him, I showed them this and I talked to him. There's the head coach and the assistant, and really sharp guys. And they're like, "You're saying, Cozy, that if the hose is bent, less oxygen. So if the leg is bent, less oxygen." I said, "Yep." So you're saying, Cozy, if we move the visitor's bench closer and ours further back, and I'm like,
now we're thinking, right? That's the game right there. I love it. That's awesome. What a great mind.
That's a winner.
Great. That's great.
They did it. I came back later in the year for a follow-up. Because look at this. The bench was
brilliant.
Okay, so that's the SmO2. It measures the oxygen, right?
Okay. Yep.
The amount of oxygen that's in the blood flow. Okay. So THb is the blood flow, right?
Sure.
Total hemoglobin.
Sure.
So if we think that if I say hockey player, I put the Moxy on and it has 80% oxygen. That's 80% out of 100. You'll never see a hockey player at 100, right? You'll see an endurance, so-called endurance, middle, especially long distance marathon. They'll be in the 90s.
Sure.
Okay. Hockey players, if we have 80, that's awesome. Okay. As they skate, it'll go down ideally to around 5%. So if we think of it in terms of, I live in Kenora, it's a 2-hour ride to Winnipeg, Manitoba. So I'm back in Canada right now. So when I film, I need to fill up I got a big truck. I need to fill it up just to get there, right? So as I get there, I got maybe 5% left in my tank.
Sure.
I get there, I go to Costco because it's way cheaper, and I fill up my gas there, right? Now the tank's full again. But for hockey players, only around 80%. Okay, so as I skate, it goes down to around 5%. I stop skating, go back to the bench, it comes back up. That's the amount of oxygen specific to the hockey player. Okay. The THb is the amount, it's the total hemoglobin, right? And it shows us two things. It shows us the blood flow. If I'm sitting here, right, and I get the Moxy in my forearm, and the blood flow would just be going straight across, no tension.
Okay.
Started to squeeze my forearm,
Sure.
blood flow will go down.
Sure.
Right? Now the blood flow might come back up to the same level, or my brain might go, hey, if he's going to squeeze again, why don't we throw some more blood there? That's a cool finding too, that we actually do move blood.
Sure.
So now I squeeze, the blood flows, no tension. I squeeze, muscle contraction force, the blood flow goes down, right? Because it's like stepping on the garden hose.
Sure. That's right.
That's blood flow, right?
Yep.
And then when I release, it might come back up to normal, or it might overshoot a bit because the brain's going, hey.
Well, that's another analogy that I think is pertinent. I think a lot of times when you see young athletes lifting weights, they say, "Oh man, I just did a heavy. I'm lightheaded." Well, that garden hose, and then it released, and the blood shot right back, and you're, oh, if you're lifting heavier loads, I think we're speaking the same language, but in a different context.
Yeah.
So
Perfect. Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So once we saw that, I'm like, okay, let's put a heating pad on. Okay, let's put an ice pack on. Let's see what it does. Right?
Sure.
What happens if my hand is hanging at my side? What happens if it's up here?
Yeah.
And yes, the heat, the ice, they'll change the blood flow. The positioning changes the blood flow. So then I'm like, okay. Doughty, this is years back. I'm like, Doughty, he never looked, his skating, I've never seen him skate bad.
Sure.
Always looks good. Beautiful skater. Now, a guy I worked with when he was young, Mike Richards, not the best skater, but he got the job done. I seen Doughty in games though, especially when he was young, stay on the ice way too long. And then he'd get control of the puck. His skating never changed. He stayed in the stance. He'd get the puck and he'd shoot it to the opposing defenseman. Why? I'm sure they're not paying him $10 million to do that. Right? So what's the physiology? What's going on? Can we mimic that? So what we did with the players, the athletes, we pushed them into survival. So that SmO2 line would go down, flat line. Now they're in a survival state. Yeah, it's important to understand that. And let's go back to that. When I put the ice pack on, or let's do it this way, people that are climbing on mountains, they're going to die, but they get rescued. But they end up losing their fingers, toes, ears, or nose, or all of them, right? Because what does the brain do? It's going to protect you in survival. It's going to bring the blood to protect the organs, especially the brain and anything to keep you alive. Forget the fingers, toes, ears, and nose, they can fall off.
Sure.
That's what happens in sports. And that's what we saw with the THb. When the green line would go into survival, the blood can shift. So if we put a Moxy in the upper body and a Moxy on the lower body, we'd see the shift from the upper body down to the lower body.
Interesting.
That's what Doughty was doing naturally.
So is it from a physiological standpoint, teach me here. I'm going over my physiology. I also referenced your notes as well. So we're saying that when we have those hockey legs or we've overextended ourselves on a shift, the brain sends a signal via chemoreceptors to say, hey man, we don't need blood here. Like we got to be in survival mode. We're in fight or flight. Is that quote unquote feeling? And there could be several. I realize the body is extremely complex. I'm not saying this is the only answer, right? But could that be a possible hypothesis, or what you're seeing? Is that what you were saying based on the narrative?
Yes.
Wow.
That's exactly what we're seeing. And we can train it. Because that's the beautiful thing. If I see it, can I go train it? And that was one of the limitations of lactate. It would give us different readings, not wrong readings.
Sure.
Wrong that we couldn't figure it out. We weren't asking the right question. Okay. I don't want to jump too far away, but I'll just a quick. We had Ryder Headstall, the only Canadian ever to win one of the big four. He was one of my Jurg's athletes since he was like 14 years old, maybe earlier. And we had him in there. I can't remember the wattage he was pushing. It was phenomenal. But anyways, we were pulling lactate. We were testing his VO2. We were testing his cardiac system. So we had a Portaman on his cardiac, so we could see stroke volume, everything live, and the NIRS and the lactate. So he finishes one just full out sprint, stop him, fully recover him. Okay, breathing, everything, THb, everything, and then sprint him again. So the lactate, I think it was super high. Let's just say, I'm not for sure on this number. Let's just say to give a number, 18. So he finishes the first sprint, lactate's 18 millimoles. Does the next sprint, the lactate's 11. Doesn't make sense.
Sure.
But we were asking the wrong question. Lactate was supposed to be something that limited you. Lactate's an energy source.
Yep.
Using the lactate as a primary energy source for this next sprint.
Wow, interesting. Yeah. You're right. You know, it's interesting, right? The technology gives you the answer. It doesn't ask the question, though, right? and that's what we talked about at the start of the podcast. When you get into quote unquote debates or arguments, I know argument being a healthy argument, that's where learning comes from, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Wow.
Okay, so that's what we see with that. Now back to the THb. So the THb is, we know it can shift, we know we can train it, right? So an athlete can shift it to the upper body or shift it to the lower body, right? Then we know what we added onto that. If we manipulate the breathing, and we'll get into that after, we can shift that blood quicker. If, to make it simple, and I didn't test Dowdy, I just use him because of his skating ability and the way he plays the game, such a talent. But with our athletes, if we could blow the CO2, as you're getting fatigued, you're creating a lot of CO2. You're burning the oxygen, creating CO2, to make it simple. If you could blow as you, especially nowadays, watching the Stanley Cup final, the second period is the most difficult period because the bench is the farthest.
Yep.
So you can outchange them, which is a huge advantage, right? Edmonton, they had so many chances when they did that, not just in the second, but especially in the third 9-minute mark, and there's about 5 minutes left. They had them hemmed in, Florida. But then all of a sudden they throw the D-man would throw the puck at Bobrovsky right to the glove. Now they get a line change. But they were fatigued. So what they do, those 5 guys, they protect the house. They contract towards in front of Bobrovsky because they're fatigued. You can see they're standing up.
Sure.
You don't want to give the puck up. So what's happened is their blood flow, they're in survival. So we know that. So that's a tactical game you can use in the power play and PK. If once you're standing, so you're covering the 1D, right? I'm covering the other D, but we're tight. We're just above the hash marks. We don't chase. Just get in the blocking lane, blow off the CO2. When you blow the CO2 off, the THb now goes back out because you're not in survival anymore.
So blowing off the CO2, that's a long exhale like you're blowing out of a straw. Is that what you mean by blowing off the CO2? Or can you explain that to me? What do you mean by that?
Move as much air as you possibly can.
So
yeah.
Just making sure I understand that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay. And we'll get into that. That will allow you to more time. That will allow you to shift out of that survival state. Now, so the THb shows us the blood flow, whether it's going down, staying steady, or increasing. Okay, so that will help us in training if we want to build more blood vessels, get recovery, all these different things. That's awesome, just that part. But the THb also shows us the contraction force, which we referred to before. So if I'm fatiguing and you trained me, I'm in wicked shape, right? I create venous occlusion 1, 2, 3 to get going, but then I'm compression. As I start to fatigue and the body starts to take the blood back, right? First we'll shift it down to the legs, give it a hand out, but then after a while it's like, hey, that's enough, man. We're shutting down. We got to save you. We're going to limit. We're not going to give you as much strength in those legs. 100%, the 100 pounds that you used to be able to squat, to make it simple numbers, is now only 80.
Gotcha.
So that changes now. The venous occlusion I used to create to make that 1, 2, 3 is now an arterial. which is limiting even more blood flow. And it just starts to pile on. Now those we can use as strategies and tactics in hockey on the power play and the PK.
Interesting. I want to get to breathing in a second, and I've got a ton of notes here, Brian, as you can appreciate. But you brought up so many cool things that I want to hit in this hour. One of which, too, I want to talk about. You mentioned this. Can I train it? But I want to ask a rudimentary and maybe an ignorant question, but I want to ask anyway. I know we have it later in the conversation, but this idea of, I read during some of my master's and PhD studies, and your knowledge now with application and real world probably dwarfs mine. So I want to be taught. Have we sorted out the debate of is it a circulatory or peripheral issue? Meaning, is the issue getting the blood and the oxygen to the muscle, or is the issue what the muscle does with it peripherally? Does that make sense? I know there's been debate about that in physiology and different research and older research and there's more recent research. From your experience, from your application, has that argument been sorted out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, two things. One, if I know it, I'll tell you.
Sure.
Because I see it and I've tested it and I know it works.
Sure.
If I don't know, I'll tell you.
Yep.
Right. And what I say is we're not asking the right questions.
Okay.
We have the technology that might show us, we're just not asking the right question, or the technology is not created to show us that yet.
Okay.
So let's take a step back. We're in Switzerland. My mentor, Jörg, that's where he's from, and both his sons. The one son has diabetes.
Okay.
Is it type 1 where he's got to take the needles?
Yes.
Okay. So he has that. So that's really cool for my mentor because now he wants to test that stuff out. It's another game another puzzle we get to play with. The other son, he is a mountain climber, right? He was into mountain climbing, hiking and that, right? He just finished Kilimanjaro just a couple months before, I think it was, or a little longer before. And then we had that Shelby Ballantyne that I first tested with the NIRS device. She was in Austria, so she came over, and we go to this mountain in Davos.
Beautiful place. Oh, gorgeous. I'm sorry interrupting you. Been there once. Life-changing, unbelievable place. One of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. Sorry.
Yes. I got to do the whole country with them, which was really cool. We were working with different athletes.
Yep.
So we go to this, and my Jörg was a Olympic speed skater, but he blew his knee out that year. But they used to train on this mountain, and they used to do hockey explosive jumps up this mountain. Now the trail on those mountains, you know how it goes. The hikers are going up, right? And way up there, there's like a restaurant way up on the ski hill. So we get there, and we have the Moxys on, and Jörg goes, "Okay, we're gonna hockey jump up this mountain." And I'm like, "Jörg, I'm pretty old, right? Now, I can look pretty good when I'm demonstrating for the hockey guys when I do 3 or 4 side-to-side explosive hockey jumps, but up a mountain?" And he goes, "Well, you don't think you can do it?" I said, "Oh, I'll do it, or I'll pass out trying, because you did it when you were younger, right?" I said, "But you were always injured." And he goes, because our guys didn't have this device. And he was going by the old aerobic model. The NIRS, the Moxy, is showing us that we use oxygen. And when oxygen gets in trouble, that's when it flatlines. You can't use it anymore. See, we're going to the central and the peripheral here.
Yep, sure.
So we start going explosive. Now we have these it was super cheap polar watches that what we did was the heart rate became we used the heart rate for SmO2 and we used something else for the THb on the watch.
Wow.
So, but you couldn't see it as you're hockey jumping up a mountain. But I knew that 15 seconds, give or take, right? And that's, I'll give you the real number. It's 17 seconds plus or minus 3 for all hockey players. That's the number. That's what you can last going full out with stops and starts. Okay. If you're at 14 seconds, we can train it up to 20. Now, 1 second in hockey is 4 meters, right? So I'm in Canada. I got to talk the standard system. So I knew that once I was getting close to that, for me, it was around 15 seconds at that time, I could feel it. And I'd stop. And then I'd look. That's how we trained our athletes. We'd have them on a bike sprinting. They're watching the SmO2, right? And then you put them into survival and they'd feel horrible. Do like 10 or 12 sets. Next week, stop them before we went into survival, and they could do 30 sets. And then we turn the screen away and say, hey, tell me when you're going to go to switch to survival. And they would, oh, right there. And I turn the screen around and go, yeah, 1 second before. Perfect. So we are giving them the experiential knowledge so they could use it on the ice in the game.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. So I knew the feeling, but I never went up like that, a mountain. It was always side to side. So we start going. Now, Shelby Ballantyne doesn't have the same strength I did. But she wanted to stay with me. She goes, this old guy's not going to beat me up the mountain, right? Because what you do, you'd go, and then as soon as you start the feeling, I'd stop. I look at my watch. Oh, yeah. I stopped just before. The SmO2's still going down. It starts to recover. As soon as it gets back up and the THb gets back up, I sprint again. I jump again. So the watch is telling me when to go again. I have to have the feeling when to stop. Okay. She was flatline. She was going into survival state.
Sure.
We think it like this. When we watch a hockey player skate, before they lose their technique, right? We call that optimum coordination or optimum performance.
Sure.
This is the new model, the new matrix. Yeah. If they start to come out of that hockey stance, they're into survival state. Okay. Let's just keep it that simple.
Sure.
Optimal coordination or performance, survival. So Shelby was going into survival.
Yeah.
And that'll shut her down.
Got it.
So I can't remember how long it took. It was over an hour. I finally got to the restaurant, and in my mind, it didn't make sense. I couldn't comprehend what I just did. That didn't make sense. I just hockey jumped up a mountain. That on the anaerobic model, there's no way that should happen.
Yep.
Okay. So there's a steeper part. I'm going up that now. I kept going. And then I seen them, they finally got up there, and I went back down, and I'm like, what did we just do? And Jurg goes, you know what we did. And I said, that the anaerobic model doesn't fit the technology. He goes, yep. Now, I couldn't walk for 7 days after that.
This episode has been brought to you by the High Performance Hockey Masterclass. The High Performance Hockey Masterclass is a comprehensive lecture series exploring the science and practice of high performers in the sport of ice hockey. It was designed and created and engineered by myself, Anthony Donskoff. It is an 8-part lecture series that includes metric fixation, the tyranny of metrics, reading research, what matters, going back to get my PhD as a 40-year-old, how do you target your readings in terms of digesting, accumulating, and reading your research, biomechanical considerations for ice hockey, the adductor magnus, how we program hip health during the off-season and in-season, the Gain, Go, Grow model, this idea of a 3-day rollover program for high-performance hockey players, considerations for the in-season, how to manipulate that model for high performers, our communication structure within the confines of Donskoff Strength and Conditioning, and finally, the fast and frugal tree, considerations for return to play. More information on the High Performance Hockey Masterclass can be found at anthonygumroad.com. Thanks for listening.
So you were monitoring your oxygen saturation. You cut it off and rested before it flatlined. You recovered and you were able to essentially get better bang for your buck because you had quality reps. You weren't riding a bike with a rusty bike chain. And you got more work or better quality of work based on the fact that you were able to use the oxygen and you recovered using your oxygen saturation levels. Am I accurate when I say that?
100%.
And if you didn't, hypothetical situation, and I want to make sure I understand this right from physiology, you didn't have the Moxy, you flatlined. That's a result of not so much central because the blood's getting there. It's the actually not central, right? Your brain's saying, hey, I can't get blood anymore there. Like I'm going into survival mode, right? So I don't get the blood there. So it's not, am I answering the question here when I'm talking through this? And the fact that it really, peripherally, you're not using, you don't have anything to use because the blood's not getting there. Am I accurate?
Accurate.
You're teaching me. All right. I'm talking through this as we go. I'm learning.
Yeah.
All right.
Now there's always a range, because you said it earlier. It's the body and the mind is extremely complex, right? But you're right. That's what happens. Once you go into a certain state of survival, it'll shut you down. So how do we know? The THb used to be, now the THb on the Moxy, let's take a step back. The SmO2 is a real number. When I put the Moxy on, I do my warm up, I get to 80% every time, 79. So it's repeatable. Super important with technology. Super important with research, right? You got to be able to repeat.
Yep.
Okay. So, and I can get that 80% down to 5% when I was in really good shape. Okay. So that's my tank. Tank is 80%. I get it down to 5. I recover back to 80. Not everyone's like that.
Sure.
Okay. So your tank might be 80% down to 40%, and then it flatlines. So that means you have a utilization situation, and we can train it. I know, because we train it down to 5%. Another athlete, his tank's only 50%, but he gets down to 2%. He's got a delivery situation, which we can train. So he needs to build more highways, more piping to deliver more blood flow.
Okay. This is getting me into a totally separate, sorry, I told you I'm going off the rocker. Okay. So I want to get into this, and it's off the cuff because we all have questions in advance on the High Performance Hockey Podcast. We try to be organized, but we're going off here. So let's walk through the real world example if you can. Okay. So I wanted this, can we train it? Number one, rudimentary question, never used it before. I am assuming the placement of the Moxy would be on a leg, a quad, because the fact that when you go into that quote unquote fight or flight or survival mode, the blood comes down. Do you, for example, if you're a hockey player, is it worn the quad? Is that where you would wear something like that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so that's
exactly.
the first question. The second question is attaining a baseline. I'm a client of yours. I've never been on a Moxy. You need to know if I have a utilization or a delivery problem. How do you assess that?
Perfect. Not the way I first started out, because I hurt them. Remember the first guy?
Okay. That's called life. I can't tell you how many times I've done that, by the way. And I hate to say it. Sometimes I still do, of course, all on accident, but at any rate.
That's what Jörg would say. He goes, hey, we never make mistakes. If they have to do more sets,
they do. That's right.
They get more workout in.
That's right.
For positional, forward, D, goaltender, we had to make up the protocol.
I like it.
We had to because we can do it in the sport.
Yeah.
There it is. We can do it position, left wing, center, right wing.
Love it.
Right. So that was the awesome part of it. And let's make it as game specific as possible. Now, yes, I put lots of Moxys on thousands of players during games. Hey, so we get to see now, we get to play and compare and that. Yes, we're similar. We work them harder in the practice. It would be super cool if we did it with the World Juniors, though, because you know how they go super hard. And for whatever reason, whoever figured that out for them, they know that 20 seconds is max, and they're right. Right? If you're going that hard, stopping and starting and finishing your checks, right? The game's changing a little more, but I'm thinking of the team where Richards was the captain. They had that unbelievable team that year, Crosby, all those guys, and they palatable Ovechkin.
Yep. Yeah. What year was that? It's gonna escape my mind. I'll have to Google that while you're on with me.
Yeah. So that team there, they were super. Sutter was coaching them. They were super short shifts, right? They were rolling 4 lines. How do you beat that?
Oh, hard too.
Yeah. It's like Florida that first period just last night.
Yep.
They finished every check.
Yep.
Yeah.
Heavy team, hard team to play against. Yeah.
So So understanding that is that if we have a tank size that has it's 80 to 40, we have to work on utilization.
Okay.
Right. So we have to train that a certain way. That means his oxygen, he's coming out of his hockey stance at around, say, 15, 16 seconds. He's coming out of that because he can't use the oxygen that's there.
Got it. So it's getting there. It's just not, he's not.
He can't use it. So we know he needs more fireplaces. He needs more mitochondria.
There you go.
You got to burn that energy. So now we know the most efficient way to train that is blood flow restriction. Right? I'm not keen on that. So I'm just going to put that athlete in positions where we create an arterial occlusion, which the Moxy shows us, because that shuts it off naturally.
You can certainly different methods in the weight room could do that as well, right? Like really focusing on tempo or long tempos, or not coming up from the concentric portion, staying in that. I got you.
Isometrics.
Sure, tons, yeah.
That's the beauty of this technology. We all, as strength trainers, we already know we have thousands of different ways of training different athletes, and but this will show us. So when I get the athletes and let's say I used to on junior teams, and that I would have 10 guys go at the same time, all with Moxys on.
Okay.
I would have them on both legs too. Because if there's an injury, one leg might be creating a compression, one might be creating a venous occlusion to an arterial. That's another story. So we have them go, right, for 20 seconds. So all of them are going to go into a survival state slightly. And all we need is four sets. We recover them totally, which every player, so if you go 20 seconds, we go every 2 minutes. So you get a minute 40 rest. To make it simple, and we know they're recovered.
Okay.
Right away, I get the picture on the screen. I go, that guy has a delivery limitation. That guy has a utilization limitation. That guy is 80 down to 5. Physiologically, that tank size is great. So here's the question that I ask coaches. I'd say, okay, we're going to scout. We scouted these guys all year. We got 2 players, one from the O, one from the Dub, and that's another argument there is. Let's say 3, and we have one from Quebec, the Q. So you have these guys, and you have they all scored 40 goals. They're all 6 foot. They're all 210, right? Just machines, good people, right? Good teammates, right? Which guy should we draft? So I say, okay, let's just do 2 guys. One guy from the O, one guy from the Dub. We have them do some hockey jumps right in the meeting with the Moxy on. One guy's tank is 80 down to 40. The other guy's tank's 80 to 20. Who should we draft?
80 to 20, right? No, my educate me. Sorry, I'm on my brains.
Okay, they both scored the same amount of goals. They're both the same physical specimens.
Okay.
This guy did it on a tank this size.
This guy had to do it on a tank
full size. We want this guy because this guy we can train.
I see.
We look like rock stars. We get him in the gym. Oh, we can get this guy to last another 2 seconds.
It's almost, correct me if I'm wrong. And I always, it's almost like too, when you look at an NHL, like a colleague of mine said this a long time ago, you look at some of the stuff in the combine, I get it. It's a snapshot of a young individual growing, but people are quick to say, well, I think it was Sam Bennett. Oh, he didn't do a chin up. It's like, okay, this guy's one of the best players in the world. Imagine that's a blank canvas. That's low-hanging fruit. We can get that improved. So you said it's all the same physiological. I know it's an apples to apples, which is impossible, but I get it. If it's an apples to apples and he's doing it on a smaller tank, we can improve the tank size, correct? And we can do that in this case we're talking improving that by occlusion, right? That occlusion, like BFR, different. That's the physiology behind that would be, and I'm trying to educate myself. We would build capillary density into the muscle that way. Is that accurate? Is that right? So it's a peripheral adaptation. I'm just making sure I understand this right? As opposed to doing something centrally, whether it's, let me ask you another thing about capillary, and I'm trying to learn here. Is that activity specific? And here's what I mean by that. I always use this analogy. I heard it a long time ago. And I don't know if it's an appropriate analogy or not, but I use it. This idea that Lance Armstrong had one of the best VO2s in the world ever, right? Now you could say he doped. Everyone probably did. Okay. I'm not saying everyone did, but he had a great one. Yet he finished 755th in the Boston Marathon. Lance Armstrong didn't train to run. He trained to bike. This is the question that goes in my head is that so he had an unbelievable peripheral system, like he could get the blood there, right? But did he not have the capillary density in his running built in as a byproduct of not running as he would in cycling? Is it activity specific, that said principle? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's a question I wrestle with in my mind. I don't know the answer. I don't know if you have it, but is it activity specific? So if we're trying to build capillary density, blood flow occlusion in the weight room, is the best way to do it on the ice? I don't know.
Both, but yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Two great analogies there with the Sam Bennett. Let's stay with Sam first, and then we'll go to Lance.
Okay.
Because Jurg, my mentor, cycling's his game.
Okay. Okay.
So he worked with a bunch of cyclists, So let's go with Sam Bennett. You're exactly right. The guy can't do one pull-up or whatever it was. I just remember the story. This wasn't firsthand knowledge. I didn't look at this.
Yeah.
I'm looking at that guy going, oh my gosh, and he's that good right now, talent-wise.
Exactly.
Right? Okay. So we had to be careful. Like Wayne Gretzky, we really didn't have to make him really strong. Right? We had to make him durable, right? A little different game. And back then we had to make sure we had a lot of tough guys around him. Sam Bennett, we have to be careful. He's not Gretzky, right? But he languished in Calgary. So what were they doing? They're doing the best they can. We always do, right? So they're doing the best they can. Obviously, they made him stronger, obviously, because he was a different player when he went to Florida. And then you have a coach and some staff, or I don't know who the situation there. That guy reinvented his game. And is there anyone else that hits? There's guys that hit harder, but he's hitting with every ounce of muscle and poundage he has.
Yep.
Like Scott Stevens, you knew when he was on the ice. Lindor should have made sure. But Bennett, when he's on the ice.
Oh yeah.
Because if you get caught, you're going to put the hurt on you.
He is.
That's a perfect example of someone got a hold of him and say, okay, he's already got the skill. I'll give it another way. A similar thing. I'm working with this is a few years ago, working with a D1 college in the States, and they're using the Moxys. It's awesome. We're live. We're watching practice, right? We got 4 or 5 guys Moxys on, and we had some guys that were coming back off injury, so we on each leg. So we're testing that out. We have guys upper and lower body, guys that fatigue earlier, so we want to see how their blood's moving. Practice finishes, and I'm sitting with their guys, and we're going over the stuff, and great discussion. Got that great questions, super smart guys, right? They're figuring a new technology out. I'm trying to help the best I can, giving them analogies, different stories. And I see some guys come back on the ice. And then the coaches just start freaking working them, like bagging them. I'm like, okay, these guys are definitely out of shape. And the guys are like, oh, my older guys are good shape. Okay. So these guys are the guys aren't playing this weekend, right? And he's like, yeah. So you're working them really hard because they're not in shape. He goes, no, I just told you that. So they're not in the lineup. Why? Because of their conditioning? No. So then why are we doing conditioning with them?
Yeah.
Maybe that guy's mental. Maybe that guy under stress starts to lose it, pops the puck up.
Yep.
It's a different tech skills we have to work. Maybe that guy doesn't have the skill level, right? So we got to work on that. Let's get more efficient in that. But the Moxy would show us that right away. It would show us right away that their conditioning is good. If we have a tank that needs more utilization, we work on that with that player. That skating would do that for sure. So that allows us that. So that's the Sam Bennett thing. With the Lance Armstrong thing is VO2 is, first of all, if you ever want a great VO2, just hold your breath at the end. It's super hard to do, but do it, and then the numbers will be through the roof, and they'll say the machine's not working.
Hold your breath till okay.
At the end. VO2, I won't name the NHL team I was working with, but the one guy's going, Cozy, we had VO2 tested on the ice, we had VO2 tested on the bike, and we had VO2 tested running. I'm like, that's freaking awesome. So you guys got those KB42s. This is before some new technology that's out there now. It was a backpack we had. We had 2 of them. And they're like, no. We used the VO2 on the bike, and then we used these numbers off of heart rate so I said, you use math to figure out their VO2. He's like, yeah. I said, there's not a freaking chance they'll be the same. Because they were saying it was all the same, whether they were skating, running, or biking. Not a chance. And that's for sure. One, the VO2 is a number that gives me nothing, except that's a VO2. How do I train that? And why would I train that? Why do I want that to be more? Does it make the player last longer, recover quicker? Well, it should, but we don't know that. I know it doesn't. We have guys with low VO2s, but there's a great big difference. If we think of oxygen and CO2 on a teeter-totter, like when you're a kid, right? And hopefully you're not heavier than me, because then you can play around with me more than I can play with you.
Yep.
So it's not this way, but it's close. As I use CO2, as I use oxygen, as the Moxy shows us I'm using oxygen, the CO2 is going up. Yep. When the CO2 gets into a certain range, that's what puts you in survival. If I could blow that CO2 off, I can last longer. So if we think of heart rate, when we see heart rate, it's only part of the puzzle. I'm not seeing stroke volume. Each beat, how much blood? If it's Gaudreau off Columbus, got a smaller heart than who's our biggest guy in the NHL right now?
Oh, Rempe, probably.
Yeah, Rempe's heart, for sure, it's bigger heart. Right. So each beat, he's pumping more blood.
Yep, stroke volume, increased stroke volume.
So cardiac output is the heart rate times the stroke volume. Same as breathing, just different words. How fast I breathe is the respiratory frequency, and the volume is the tidal volume. So once we knew that, and we had the technology to test it, we got a hockey player, we assess them on the Moxy on the ice. He has a tank 80 down to 20. The amount of air he can move, we test him on a breathing machine, he can move 150 liters per minute of air. Okay? So he sprints, and then he recovers. Sprints and recovers. It takes him, say, for an example, it takes him 60 seconds to recover. Then he can go again. Sprint, 60 seconds to recover, go again. So that guy could, every triple shift, he'd be very efficient in the game.
Yep.
Depends on the game, how long the shifts are. But if we're running 20 seconds, third one. Okay.
Yep.
He moves 150 liters. If we can train him to move 300 liters per minute, he should recover in 30 seconds instead of 60.
Sure.
You know what happened? He recovers in 30 seconds, 30 to 40 seconds.
Just by the breathing, and that is blowing off excess CO2, correct?
Yes. So moving more air, blowing off the CO2. So when athletes, they go, hey, I got my VO2, I'm going, awesome. Make sure when you bring it to me or you send it to me, I see the RF, the respiratory frequency, and the tidal volume, because those are the numbers I need. Think of a hose, a garden hose, right? When you turn it off, there's still water in the hose.
Yeah.
In breathing, that's the dead space. That's your trachea.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if hockey players, if they don't breathe efficiently, so if you watch me breathe, I breathe like this, like a kid. My rib cage moves. Efficient. Diaphragm goes down. If hockey players are breathing up here, they're already at a limitation. The number one limiter is the breathing. The CO2 shuts down. We see it with the Moxy. So if we can increase their amount of air they can move, they can recover faster and last longer. The VO2 gives us those numbers. The problem is it cannot be on a bike. I need it on the ice.
Yeah, there you go. They looked at some research. I looked at it a long while ago, but you're right. The VO2 is very different on the ice than it is the bike, than it is the running, etc.
Yeah.
You mentioned, can we train it? You said if it's a utilization problem, it's more periphery. We could train with occlusion. If it's a delivery problem, is it, this idea, I know it's really sexy now in our lingo, this zone 2 cardio, or is it eccentric cardiac hypertrophy? Can you do aerobic circuits? Is it, um, uh, um, let's say, longer, slow distance tempo runs, more where you're staying in that 60 to 70% below range to increase the size of the left ventricle? Is that at the delivery? Can we train it?
Yes. It's like we're partners. You're just leading me right to the next thing. So, are you the centerman, or am I the winger, or I'm the centerman? You're the winger?
You're the centerman, baby. I'm playing left wing.
Need you on the off wing for the one time. Okay, so if what we did there, because we had the physio flow, we could see, and Jurg was already doing this with the cyclists, with the endurance guys. See, when Jurg and I met, he's like, "You hockey players are horrible condition." I said, "Yeah, probably compared to cyclists, because we don't bike. But I bet your cyclists are horrible hockey players." He's like, no, I mean conditioning. You guys can't last like us." Said, okay. So I said, you're a cyclist. Jump on your bike, put it to a tension that you could last for 30, 40 seconds, right? Just watch a hockey game and sprint. Pick one player, right? A top player, right? And when they're on the ice, which will be lots, you sprint. And when they're not, you sit still. Comes back after the weekend, he goes, "Oh, it's a different game." I said, "Oh yeah, who'd you pick?" "Ovechkin, when he first got in the league."
Yeah. Jeez.
Until Chauncey got a hold of him, right?
Yeah.
Chauncey coached me in university. So
no way.
Yeah. So Jurg says, "Okay, it's the breathing. The breathing's the key for these guys. They can't move enough air. It's the CO2 getting higher, right? So we got to work on that." Now, to go back to your question, is delivery with the Portamon, we want to increase the stroke volume. So the heart doesn't have to pump as hard. So we want to train left ventricle. We could see it as we were training it. And then we say, okay, once we see that and we mirror it with the Moxy, we know what we're training. So we could train, and let's take a step back. Remember I gave you the matrix, the new model, optimal performance and survival?
Correct.
If I want to train utilization, I do lots of survival training, flow restriction, arterial occlusion. If I want to train delivery, I do lots of optimal performance training. Now, here it goes back to the old argument, and that's a great argument about the muscle fibers and all that different stuff. We have to see this picture, what I'm explaining. You've got to have the ability. I'm working up here at 7 Generations, an educational institute, and they brought me in to work with the team, to get the team. They expand to 600%, build a team for us, Cozy, right? So in that, it is the same thing. We got to build a team in here.
Sure.
So we could go at this in so many different ways, like you were saying. The saying is, if we train them too slow, right? If we train them too slow, they're going to lose that ability, that so-called fast twitch fiber stuff, right? So we still need that, but we're still thinking in the anaerobic aerobic model then. Put that aside. Everything's aerobic. You're always using oxygen, okay? So if we just take that, well, I don't know, I want to argue that. Okay, but just go by the Moxy. When you're using oxygen, it's going down, your optimal coordination, the coach's eye sees it. When you go into survival, the oxygen plateaus. Are you still using it? Yes, but not at the same rate. And you're using all these other awesome lactate, all these different glycogen, all these other stuff too. We can't see that. I just know for sure, when that line flatlines, you're coming out of your skating stance. You're in survival. You're in trouble. We're going to pass the puck around a little more, make you move a little more, and we'll attack the net when we can get a clear lane at it. We're not going to throw the freaking puck to his glove when you guys are in survival state. When Jurg was young, he gave a presentation. He was in Bern University giving a presentation to all those guys, the velodrome.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Yep.
You know,
Yep.
they get off the bike, they don't even look real. Their legs are so freaking huge, right? They got to walk one leg around the other leg. Okay. He gives a speech to all these coaches, their trainers. And some guys got up and left. They're like, this is bullshit, you know. He's saying, all the guys are strong. They're all strong. You don't need to get them stronger. You need to get them to be able to relax. Remember the definition of coordination? Contract and relax. These guys can freaking contract. Unbelievable. You got to learn to relax. So at the end of it, Jurg's packing up, and this guy comes up, real tall guy, and he says, Mr. Feldman, he says, I loved your speech. You know, I enjoyed your speech, he said. And Jurg goes, you're the only guy, you know? And he goes, do you train cyclists? He goes, not yet. I'm going to, but he says, this is just an idea I have. And he goes, do you want to see your idea tomorrow? Do you want to come out for a bike ride with me? He goes, who are you? Olympic champion and world record. Jurg gets there the next morning. The guy's coach gives him his bike. Jurg gets on, starts to pedal, doesn't even move. He's like, oh, the chain fell off. Isn't that embarrassing? And he looks down, the chain's on, and they're laughing. And what we did was, we had the same idea you did. We don't need to get them stronger. We need to get them to build to coordination better. So as long as he can push, say it's 130 RPMs, as long as he can push that with using less energy, he can last longer. And if you get up it and go faster, so we have to upregulate his central nervous system by getting better contraction regulation. So they changed the gear ratio. So you had to spin at 130 RPMs for the bike to even move, and it would just crawl. So if you watched him, Jurg says, Jurg had a video, but he didn't show me. He says there was a nun going by with a habit on and a bike passing him. But he looked at his feet were going like Speedy Gonzalez. He was upregulating his central nervous system. There's a machine we have, impulse machine. It upregulates your central nervous system. It's very similar. So Jurg took that idea and said, okay, we can train super slow. You're at zero tension and your legs are going, and all of a sudden you go from 100 RPMs, 110, 120, 130. We're getting them quicker to contract and relax. And we're still training the aerobic system. We don't have to go slow. You have to use a bike. You could do a slow run if you want to use the run, because that's good for the joints. There's different reasons in that. Or I could have him sprint for 3 seconds, recover fully. Sprint for 3 seconds, so it looks like this. Sprint, recover, sprint, recover, sprint, recover for 40, 50 shifts. 60, 70 for 60 minutes. Same thing, both growing more blood vessels, better delivery. So the idea is I can go slow and it will build more blood vessels, or I can push a ton of blood. It's like a river in BC when I was out there. When the ice starts to melt in the windy river, all of a sudden it makes new antigenesis, whatever the big word is. You're creating more blood vessels, right?
Yep.
That's another way you can do that with speed. You could do that with a little resistance. But you're always staying aerobic, so-called. You're always staying with the green line going down, never flatlining. Basketball players, when we see them, the guards, they play around 30, 40% their whole game. They stay there. Unreal. That's their physiological picture for there. So then we want to train them around that. Okay? If a person has a delivery problem, we don't want to train them there because that's what they do anyways. We have to train them at a different way. So we have all these different methods.
Sure.
So now we can play.
Big time. Very interesting. I want to make sure I respect your time. We're at an hour and 15. I definitely want to do a part 2 with you to talk much more deeper physiology. And I want to talk more about the methods. And I know you've been doing a deep dive in personal yoga and talking about breathing. Can't we teach breathing? And
If so, is it a difficult process, or is it one of those deals where you've got a full team and you can dial it back? For example, hey, maybe a better question, a targeted question, and this isn't too much broad. So, hypothetical question: I want to teach breathing for a hockey player that just came off a shift and wants to recover. I want to teach breathing for a hockey player about ready to get on the ice and go for a shift. What are the differences, if any?
So super easy way we figured this one out, and it was walking up a hill or going at a speed where by the time you get to the top of the hill, you can use stairs, right? We use squats, different with the hockey players would do explosive side to side. You do as many reps or you go up a hill that when you get to the top that you're breathing heavy.
Sure.
Right? Then you go back down. So say it's a steep hill like where I am here, we've got some steep hills. There's this big one I walk to work. By the time I get to the top, I'm breathing heavy.
Yep.
Right. So say I have that hockey player that you want to train, he's with me. We walk up there to get to the top. He still can talk, but it's trouble carrying conversation on, right? Great tool we used to use lots of times training. We walk back down, his breathing gets back to normal. If I had a Moxy on, as soon as your breathing's back to normal, the SmO2 and the THb are recovered. The breathing is the key. I don't need, after I know the Moxy, I don't need it to see that I'm recovered. My breathing's back to normal. Now I say, okay, I want you to hold your breath for the first 10 steps up this hill. And he doesn't even get to the top, or he gets to the top and he's, what happened? Well, I held my breath, right? I got no oxygen at the top. Oh, but the Moxy says you still got 80%. The CO2 rose up. The CO2 shut him down. But don't believe me. Let's go back down again. We go back down, recover his breathing, is back to normal. I say, okay, I want you to lift your arms because he's not he doesn't have the proper breathing mechanics. He has to remember, we have to remind him how to breathe like he was when he was a kid. But that's later. I just want to show him so he bites the hook. We're up in Canada, we love fishing. So bite the hook. So lift your arm up. When you lift your arm up, what do you do with your rib cage? It opens up. So inhale huge, exhale huge. So what is he doing? He's blowing his CO2 level down.
Got it.
Walk up the hill. He walks up there, he's not even breathing heavy. So for the next week, anytime you're going upstairs or you're going to go up a hill, do 4 or 5 big breaths, not too many, because you'll hyperventilate. That's the opposite. Just 4 or 5, because we haven't trained your breathing yet. And you blow your CO2 level down. So as you start going up the hill, as you get up a quarter of the way, now your breathing's at the normal where before you did the technique. Before I go on the ice, what do? 3 or 4 big breaths, get my CO2 level down. That gives me extra time. Every time the puck's flipped over the ice, over the boards, or there's a whistle, what am I doing? CO2.
Yep.
So when the puck is dropped, we'll go again. I get extra time, right? I worked with a player. I won't say his name. Number one, he's their top PP, top PK guy, top face-off guy. Sometimes he's not fully recovered when he gets back to the bench. So for him, as soon as the shift ends, he's blowing off the CO2 to get it back down. And then you don't want to blow it too much because you want to be in a state where you can recover, the body refuels. But just before he's going to go back on, he's got to blow it off again. But sometimes he wouldn't get it blown off enough, and he's got to get back on because of the key face-off in his zone. So he's blowing it off as he skates back, and then he stops and goes, my breathing's back to normal. I'm good to go again. He would know just by his breathing. That was a tool he used to monitor, to give him extra time on the ice so he could last longer and to recover quicker. And every stoppage of play, during the shift, even gliding, he can move more air. So that brings us to the next thing. We've got to teach him, one, is to get the breathing mechanics. We have to teach him how to remember that. So we have some simple techniques of you can lay down, hands on the rib cage, just to get him to remember, okay? Buteyko was a guy that had it figured out. He's got some, and there's another guy, I'll get you the name, real interesting guy, music guy. He figured out how to increase the lung capacity just by breathing, remembering the proper breathing techniques. So real simple, we can get them to get back to breathing like when they were a kid, which once they do that, if you're breathing up here, your CO2 balance is off. Once you do that, you're more efficient. Their heart rate goes down. If you catch their throat falling, that goes down. They're using less energy. They're more efficient. Okay. So in saying that, now we want to, once you do that, we have there's a company, IDIAG, they had a spiral tagger. My mentor had one, and he introduced me to it. That's how we increased. We had hockey players at 150 liters. That's what they could move when we tested them at the start, their base. We had them up to 300 to 400 liters per minute.
Jeez.
Wow. We also had that, is it SEMG, measures electrical activity?
EMG, yeah. I don't know the S, but EMG it does, of course. Yeah.
Well, surface.
Yep.
Yeah.
EMG. Yep. Surface EMG. I got you.
If you're hanging and you bring your feet up and you can touch your feet to your hands, no swings, and bring them down and do 25, either you're a gymnast or you got an amazing core. Of all the core exercises we tested, that created the most electrical activity. Okay. Breathing, lifting your arms into the large, biggest bag size creates 4 times more. We were increasing their core strength because core strength is internal. If you blow up a balloon and you try and push your hands, you'll never get it if the balloon's blown fully, because core strength's inside out. There's a lot of stuff there. I'm making it universal and simple. But we know that if a person could do, say, 10 leg lifts, not most guys, 1 or 2, and usually knees bent, we just did breathing with them. We didn't do much core besides the basic stuff, to keep that. All of a sudden they could do 10, 15, 20 because of the breathing, and they could move that much more air. So just think on the power play. We want to get it in their zone. We want to make the guys move. Once they come out of their hockey stance, we got them. Their blood flow now is limited. Even if they get it on their stick, they shoot it weakly to our guy. How many times does it happen?
Yeah.
Right?
Bad decisions, right?
That's not even the mental part. And then what happens when you realize that you're fatigued?
Oh, yeah.
You mentally start to beat yourself up.
Big time.
Now it's even more of a constriction. So these all add up. Like you're right. The body, the mind is extremely complex. With this tool and with the breathing, we have a breathing device called the NX. It's not on the market yet. So we've taken the IDIAG's spiral tagger. They don't make them anymore, and we've made our own device so we can. It's sport specific, and you can drop it. The other one you couldn't drop, and all these things. So that way we can train the most important skill. And I asked trainers this. I'd say, "You train all the muscles?" Because I was asked this question by my mentor. I go, "Absolutely." Like, I train a lot of these college guys, pro guys. He goes, "So you're training the respiratory muscles, eh?" I'm like, "No."
Yeah.
He goes, "So what's the most important thing?" Breathing. Yeah. Affects everything. How you think, the mental capacity. When the CO2 level goes up, what happens with the mind?
Cloudy.
Core decisions, right?
Sure.
Core strength. So the main thing is that link between our upper and lower body is that core strength and more. But let's teach proper breathing mechanics. Let's get them on a breathing machine so they can move more air, so they can last longer, recover quicker. And then how about, especially in the NHL, how about after they fly from city to city, we can have them sitting there and we can have them train hypoxically, right? So you have an SpO2 sensor. So it shows your oxygen, or if you have a CO2 monitor, end-tidal CO2, we can get your on an SpO2 sensor. You just breathe on that machine, limiting the amount of oxygen until you get down to 90 to 94%. That's a vasodilation. CO2 is an anti-inflammatory. We recover the players quicker.
Wow. Interesting.
Between games, in travel.
We're going part 2 on that one. I want to hear all. I want to hear all about this physiology, and I'm dead serious. I'm fascinated by it, and I like to learn as I go here. Let me ask you again. I want to respect your time. We're up on the hour and a half. Where can listeners learn more about you and the Moxy unit?
So the Moxy, that they have their own website, right? Roger, brilliant guy. He's the main inventor of that. Great guy. For sports specific, that's where it comes to us. So the company for me is Evolve Health and Performance, right? And I'm on Instagram. It's all linked together, and we're on Facebook and stuff like that, LinkedIn and that stuff. And the other way is I'm super busy because I'm up here doing this, but plus I'm also training athletes and some SEALs. But I always have time for these discussions because normally, like, you knew when I was saying stuff, you already knew it. You were just taking your experience and saying, is this what you're seeing, Cozy? I'm like, yeah, that's what we see. And then I explain it. But you already know this. Just like everyone else, they already know what they do. They're the best in their games. It's just we got technology that shows us some stuff that we can do better.
Sure.
We can save a lot of time, and all of a sudden you go, oh my God, I would like to know what I did to that guy. What happened with Bennett? He's a perfect example. One pull-up, and now he's crushing guys.
Our guest today has been my left winger, actually my centerman, Brian Kozak. I feel like I know him to call him Cozy. Thank you for your time. And I am telling you right now on this recording, I hope you agree to come back for part 2. This is going to be deep physiology. I want to talk to you all about the breathing. I want to talk about the newer technology that you have yet to release. And we're going to do part 2 on this physiology because I know, speaking from experience, that our listeners will have learned a ton, not just from this conversation, but hopefully from our future conversation. So I appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you, Anthony.